It's a great pleasure to be able to introduce Mauricio Hans. Let me say say something. Many years ago, I was very fearful of the rising power of the PT, especially when Lula was elected. Everybody was, and then to the great surprise, Lula seemed to have tremendous instinct of running a very complicated country, improving the situation, and certainly making substantial improvement to the social situation of Brazil. Followed by Dilma, who took over from the PT, and again revealing herself as being a very courageous woman who is very busy cleaning up the politics, cleaning up the morality, it seems, of Brazil. Is this within this tradition that I was very happy about these events, because it sort of also reflects the career of Mauricio. Mauricio Hans is also a member of the PT, but he's a very independent person. He's a Pernambucano. He studied law at one of the most prestigious and ancient law faculties in Brazil, the law faculty of the University of Pernambuco. He then dedicated himself to labor law and dedicated himself for many years to working for labor unions. He then interrupted his activities as a lawyer and went to England, to the UK, and received a doctorate in political science at Oxford. And his doctoral dissertation was highly recognized, and as a matter of fact, it was then published as a book. The book is called Labor Relations and the New Unionism in Contemporary Brazil, which was published by Macmillan. Then when he returned to Brazil, he continued to teach law at the faculty, continued his business as a labor lawyer, but then also devoted himself to politics and got himself elected by a whopping majority to the equivalent of the House of Representatives. He's a Deputado Federal. He got re-elected last year, but he now, this is a peculiar thing you can do in Brazil, he can take leave of his post, and he took leave of his post at the request of another rising political figure in Brazil, the governor of Pernambuco, who also was re-elected, but not by the PT, with a huge majority to continue to a second term as governor. Well, the governor, Eduardo, invited him to be his special representative for special projects, and to do this on a bipartisan way, and he then took leave, and that is what he's currently doing. It's really a great pleasure to introduce a man who is a dedicated idealist, a politician, lawyer, and also a fellow academic. Mauricio.
So thank you very much for the opportunity to address such a distinctive group of scholars. I'd like, as a member of Brazilian Parliament, to express our gratitude to the three institutions that are now providing a so enlightened discussion on education and innovation in our country. So I'd like to express my gratitude to Tom, our host, here. Now he's in front of the presentation, in the name of all the professors and students and staff of Columbia, to say thanks to the University of Illinois through my friend Werner Berg and Mary Ahrens, and also to our friends from Harvard, Marilee and Jason. It's really a great honor for us. I do think that this kind of events we have to enhance and to spread the discussions. Of course, we saw some very specific topics, but from the hot discussions that we're about to start, we can imagine how we can develop these ideas that have been discussed here. I remember when I was thinking of going to the university, my father, who was an engineer, a very talented engineer, and he had the dream of having his sons going to the engineering faculty. Brazil was, at that moment, growing a lot, and he thought that Brazil needed more technological personnel. And then I went to the law faculty. At that moment, I want to be a diplomat, then a lawyer, then a politician. Then my brother, Alexandre, who was a student in his DPhil in economics at Illinois, he was supervised, very well supervised by Werner. He went to economics. And he was very disappointed because Alexandre was very keen on mathematics. And he didn't go to the engineer course. So now, when I received with Governor Eduardo Campos some companies that are interested in investing in Pernambuco, in Brazil, some of the first questions that they raise is, how many engineers do you have here in the state of Pernambuco? How many qualified technical personnel you have here? What are you doing about that? So we have talked to Fiat, to Volkswagen, to Foxconn, just to quote a few examples of that. And I would say that all the shortcomings and the promises that we have seen here in this morning, I'd like to add this point. We have too much concentration, apart all the problems that we saw here, we have too much concentrations in some courses that are not in direct connection with the immediate needs of the development growth of the country. We saw some improvements, but I do believe that we have to put more incentives, to more thought on fostering this kind of attitude of the young. In my home, Patricia, my wife, is here. We ourselves, I had this intention of having some students more connected with the needs of the Brazilian growth moment. And both went to the law school. I would say against our will, but it was their will. Why? Because there are so many incentives for the civil servants' career, particularly in law in Brazil. So a lot of talented students go to the courses that are not in connection with the needs of the Brazilian economy now. So that's something that I'd like to stress. And let me start here. In this short presentation, I'd like to give some lights on what's happening in the education system as a whole. Then I'd like to quote the example, the case study of my home state, the state of Pernambuco, which is applying some of the goals, some of the conceptions, some of the visions of the education system in Brazil now. We have just realized a conference, a national conference, in the last week of March in 2010, and this conference produced a guideline, the National Education Plan. I will bring here some discussion, some ideas of this plan. Since we understood that the problems that we have at graduate studies level have much to do with the problems with basic education, elementary and high school education. So we are very concentrated now as a country in providing a new approach to education in the country, a more systemic, holistic approach, connecting students, the policies for students since preschool level up to postgraduate studies, and also taking care of technological or vocational training for the new moment that the country is experiencing. So my idea is this, to bring here some of the ideas that are inspiring this move of the changing of the education system in Brazil. So we have already some partial achievements. We are not, we have seen here this morning that we have achieved some important targets, but we realize that we are in need of much more improvements to do in the system as a whole. So I just quote this, the idea that children from 7 to 14 years, we are good. They are 98% at schools. And also, we have a good record, a good improve since 1995 in primary and high school graduating rates from 29 for these people above, below 16 years old to 61% in 2007. It's quite an improvement. In the same period, graduate rate for 19 years old increased from 17 to 44%. The PISA, although the top best, we are very bad at them, but anyway, PISA as an exam, an international recognized exam, has signaled some improvements in data of Brazilian education. So this attitude of the public sector, the social movements, of everybody involved with the education issue in Brazil is producing this National Education Plan. Now is a proposal of law that was sent by President Lula at the very end of his government. And this bill is being discussed at the Education Committee and in a special committee in the House, and probably it will be approved in a couple of months. It is a general plan for changing education in Brazil, in this philosophy that I have just mentioned. So we have 10 guidelines, 20 goals, and 100 strategies. It proposes to develop National Forum for Education and a National Education Council, so involving all the actors of the education system in the country. And also, it aims at articulating a national education system for the country. So this kind of systemic approach for the issue. And I'd like to put the main guidelines, because they show that we have another approach. Now, the country has matured another approach towards education. So we have eradication of literacy, illiteracy, universalization of school assistance, overcoming of educational inequalities, educational quality improvements, the problem of qualities, everybody's concerned about that, professional training, promotion of social environmental sustainability, humanistic, scientific, and technological promotion of the country, expansion of investment in education by increasing the percentage relative to GDP through the setting of goals. Now, you know, the GDP spent in education now is 4.7%, and the goal of the National Education Plan is to set that 7%. And professional recognition for those who work with education, so the minimum salary for the high school teachers is one of the proposals in that direction, besides the training, the qualification of the teachers. And dissemination of the principles of equity, respect for diversity, and democratic management of education. So there is a need of values in education. Education for the people who are involved with the National Education Plan is not a neutral issue. So there are some values that we can deduct, for example, from the principles of the Brazilian 1988 Constitution. So this Education Development Plan is a kind of translation of the goals of the National Education Plan. So the Education Development Plan is a set of more executive plan comprising 54 programs in those directions. Try to make reality of those guidelines of the National Education Plan. So we have some goals like replacing the fragmented view of education by a systemic approach, as I mentioned. So overcoming, for example, traditional antagonism between basic education and higher education, between basic education and training and technical education. So those kind of fragmentation and antagonism are to be superseded by this new idea, this new philosophy of the Education Development Plan and the National Education Plan in Brazil. So with the goal of engendering creative and involved and conscious citizens. The main pillars of the Education Development Plan: systemic vision of education, territoriality, so to spread the access to education to all the Brazilian territory, not concentrate only in one or two states and only on the capitals. Development, economic development, so connecting with the private sector with all the innovations in the economy. collaborative scheme, so the idea of connecting the Brazilian Federation, the states, and the municipalities. All are responsible, all are actors, acting in harmony, in collaboration to achieve those goals. Accountability, so transparency, the evaluation system to develop that, which has already been started, and social mobilization. I think that it was, I don't remember if it was Giorgio, some of our friends have mentioned this morning. We need, Glauco has mentioned that. We need mobilization. We need put education as a key goal of the Brazilian people. It's not a matter of going slowly, gradually. We have to make a revolution to meet all the needs of the Brazilian new scenario. So I'd like to stress that it's not a matter of numbers, of increasing places in graduate schools, in postgraduate schools, in primary and higher, in high school. It's a matter of changing the approach, the underlying assumptions of educational plans in the country, a new philosophy, a more systemic, taking care of the citizen since the preschool after to the moment that he is ready to go to the job market. So this kind of idea, this kind of project has produced a lot of achievements and institutions and instruments that are helping the country to achieve those goals. So the Fundeb, the Basic Development Education Rate for evaluation, the articulated action plan. So there is a commitment between the Ministry of Education, the state secretaries of education, and the municipal authorities. So they make some articulated plan. It's not a matter of the union handing out resources to the municipalities, but handing out according to an articulated plan. So a program of national teachers planning, the minimum salary I have mentioned, the expansion and interiorization of Federal University. Lucia has mentioned we have added a great number, more than 200 campi throughout the Brazilian territory, and more investments in younger people studying at all levels, diversity, which was mainly boosted by a program, Marcia has mentioned, by a program like the ProUni, which has managed to add something like 900 poor students receiving scholarships from the private institutions. So 900,000 students that were probably out of graduate studies in the country due to the program called ProUni. So EJA, education of adults and young of adults. So we have these initiatives that are making the system going ahead. Just a quick look at the education fund. So in 2003, the GDP, the spending of education in the GDP was only 3%, 0.9. Now it's 4.7. The budget of the education ministry now has been raised from 17 billion reais in 2003 to 51 billion reais in 2010. And the National Basic Education Fund, they call it Fundeb, which was an extension from the Fundef, who was created in the former government of Fernando Henrique Cardoso. The Fundeb, which includes now preschool and primary school, preschool, primary school, and high school. So we have a fund of 76 billion of reais. The Education Development Plan is really very concerned with teachers. So making better teachers is the good strategy for improving the quality of education. So we have some, in this development plan, we have some principles for graduate studies. So the goal of enrolling 1 million graduate students. Now we have just received the census. The census brings us good news for graduate studies in Brazil, for higher education. For example, now, I think that Lucia has mentioned as well, now we have 6.3 million students enrolled in graduate studies in the country. We have a strong participation of the women. Now women are increasing their participation in the number of enrolled graduate students in Brazil. From they are now 57% in this new census that has been just released by INEP. So 53%, it was the previous data. No, it was the data in 2001. Now 57%. Women are helping to overcome inequalities that we have in a country as a whole, at least taking some more places than the men. And it's amazing what strikes us in this just released census as well is the increase in the number of PhD in the federal university, the public university, from 35% to 49%, half, 50%. So the increase in number of PhDs is 123%. In master degrees, 99.6%. So those are some of the data that have just been released by the census provided by INEP. So there is this principle of improving the number, of increasing the number of places, improving quality, providing social inclusion in the graduate studies through ProUni, through the student financing like FIES, and also the concern with territorial expansion, as I mentioned. 11 new federal universities from 43 to 230 new campuses, new campi, at most of them, as I said, in the countryside areas of the country. So a connection with economic and social development of the country. And these policies, these ideas, these philosophies being applied by the state of Pernambuco. So the state of Pernambuco, under Governor Eduardo Campos, is developing a very challenging educational policy. So concerned with consolidation of educational accountability policies, goals, evaluations, and incentives, we have already created a state index to assess the quality, the improvement of the high schools in the state of Pernambuco. And there is a process of monitoring every month, monitoring all the schools being controlled by the governor and by the staff of education secretary. And also the definition of basic operating standards for schools with certification, maintenance, and including physical networks. So there was a need of recovering the structure of the state schools when the government started. And also a very strong concern with high school. So developing some programs to extending the school days. So we call integral and semi-integral schools. And also we are building up a lot of technical schools in the state to provide a better and more connected technical training for the people at the high school age. So 3 basic conditions were implemented for consolidating the educational accountability policy. Clear purpose and goals for each school, our evaluation system, they called IDEP, and a system of incentives for those schools which accomplished the goals. So even giving more resources to those schools, to the staff, etc., according to the achievement of that targets. This is just an example on how the governor and the education secretary used to monitor the school. So this is a school in the Sertão, very far from the capital. And these are the elements which composes the regional index. They called IDEP, the IDEP. So students' attendance, teachers' attendance, lessons planned that were given, fulfillment of contents, students below the average in those index, schools at basic standard, and family participation. This is a composite, specific index created in Pernambuco, and it is compared with the external measurements. So this is school. So when we take in a sitting like that, we put all the directors of the school in a room, and we open all the schools by region. and there is the director, and sometimes in this same meeting, the director is replaced at that moment. So there is a process, a very, very strong process of monitoring the achievements of every school according to preset goals and targets. Here, the basic standards, situation of the schools, that program, high quality secondary schools. So the goal is to provide 300 high schools, integral or semi-integral, in order to universalize the access of the students that completely primary education. And also the construction of 60 new technical schools in addition to the federal schools that we have in the state. So this is a kind of management, as I have mentioned, and this is an example. These graphs shows that the number of schools from 8 to 9, which increase the achievements of at least 50% of their targets. So they are improving because they are being controlled, they are being provided with more equipments, more training to the teachers. So there is a steady line of improving in these achievements. So the results, just to show you, the results are promising. I wouldn't say that they are enough, but they are promising because all the curves are going up. So if you take the primary schools in the first graph, you have a reason from 3.1 to 3.9 from 2005 to 2009. The same applies to the final years of primary education and also to high school. Mainly when the curve is in the integral and semi-integral schools, it's amazing how the curve is different. It's much higher than the other ones. So we have the same, the results going up. Here, the performance of PISA. So every school that have this program is better in Portuguese lecturing, in mathematics and science. So the index is concerned with measuring those achievements. And also the performance of the dropout rate is going down. The rate of age grade distortion is going down as well. And the approval rate is going up. So all the results that we have are promising. We are not satisfied with them, but they are promising. And I would say that's what I'd like to stress, is they express this kind of national policy that has been put forward in these national forums, in these national legal marks, all the discussion of the maturing of the educational community in the country. Now, in the state of Pernambuco, although it's a poor state, which has just started to develop faster. Now, as Lucia has mentioned, we are growing at a rate of 9.3, but we have this demand for qualified people. The state has created particular agents concerned with vocational training, with qualifying workers and students for the new companies that are arriving at the place, but it's not enough. We are in the right direction. And I brought this example of Pernambuco just to highlight that the broad principles of the National Education Plan, the programs of the development of Education Development Plan, all those ideas, all these conceptions, the involvement of the social actors, not only from the education sector itself, but from the community as a whole, involving also the national Parliament, all this combination is producing some results. We saw here this morning a lot of good results. We saw the shortcomings and the challenges to be addressed in the future. And I brought here the case of Pernambuco, which is a state who is applying those principles with very good results and promised results, better to say. So thank you very much.
My name is Renato Pedrosa from UNICA, the Group of Studies in Higher Education. Sorry, I'm sore throat. I'm not addressing this talk, but all the subject that were treated this morning. And I think the point that Phil Alpert has raised about the differentiation of the system what we are seeing is that probably the main source of hope is the vocational, professional colleges. There's a federal system, and there are some state systems. In the state of São Paulo, I think Professor Bala showed the general, but in the state of São Paulo, the growth is really very, very intensive, and it's almost matching the number of students in the universities. And we have seen some studies showing that the returns for the students in terms of salaries is higher than most of the academic degrees. There are exceptions in law, in medical schools, medicine, and engineering. But after that, the next group of best, this is a study just done by the Ministry of Education, INEP, the Institute for Research in INEP, saying that from the group that graduated in 2008, the second after engineering, for the groups that participated in the second highest median average of salary was for the technological vocational graduates. And so I think it's kind of hard for Brazil to change the law and the tradition and start a public system without research and graduate schools. But certainly there is already a public system of federal institutes and in the state of São Paulo of vocational colleges, which is growing. It's now more than 10% of the whole enrollment, and that's where probably there's a way for getting more access for a larger audience.
Mauricio, do you want to answer one at a time, or do you want to listen to a few other? Well, why don't you, let's hear a few other comments or questions, if there are any, and then Mauricio will give his final remarks. Yeah, back there. Please speak loud.
I have a comment and a question. First, a comment is regarding the issue of funding and the public funding for universities. I recently worked with a team on a proposal to have graduates or those who have exited public universities, whether they graduated or not, to have their costs of education at the public university treated as a partial loan. So say 30%, what we proposed was 30% of the cost of their education measured by semester would be treated as a loan to be repaid after exiting the university. And that fund, those funds that were repaid could be refunneled back into the primary and secondary education system, and also they could be split. Our proposal was to split them partially to go to the primary and secondary system, and then partially also to high-performing NGOs that are working amongst youth to improve educational outcomes coming up into the university system, and to help with the budget problems in the public sector. The question is then regarding the issues of quality coming out of the secondary system and into the university system. Are there any efforts, or have there been efforts contemplated by universities to partner with secondary schools to improve educational quality at that level?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
There's one there.
Yes.
Yeah, Rodrigo, I have a comment on the. I believe there is a historical reason for why we have some lack of equipped personnel in some areas of education. So, for example, naval engineering, we miss those in Brazil because for many, many decades there were no jobs for those people. So most universities who prepared people to be naval engineers closed, which is the case of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, for example, which used to be very famous for naval engineering and dropped a lot because there were no naval engineering in Brazil. And in the last years, the naval engineering industry is revamping again, so there is a lack of naval engineers. Oil engineers, the same thing. However, someone mentioned earlier that Brazil might not be importing those people, and actually they are. Ike Batista, for example, from the X companies, OGX, being whatever X it is, but a lot of X's companies. He, in 60 Minutes, like 2-3 months ago, he made a joke to the reporter and that he was importing engineers from the United States, actually. So a lot of engineers are being imported from other countries, especially the United States. The second comment is regarding patents. I believe that in Brazil, a lot of people don't register patents because two things. First, the process is too complicated. It is like hell to get a patent in Brazil, first of all. And the second of all is that I believe that if you want to register a patent, you have to register a patent in each and every country you're going to sell that product. And if they're going to sell in Brazil, they're not going to register a patent in Brazil because there is not a lot of protection for intellectual property. So, I mean, unless they want to sell the product in the United States, then they register the patent here. Otherwise, if they want to sell in Brazil, they're not going to do that. The Chinese are doing that because they're doing everything. They're shooting to every side. So they're registering more patents in the U.S. now than Americans are. So, but this is a characteristic of the Chinese in particular. The question is, which is those were the comments. The question is, regarding the PhDs, is there any research that shows how many of those PhDs from the 71% who are in the academic world also work on the private sector? Because many of them, and I've been into the private sector, I've worked with many of those professors from the academia in the private sector with additional incomes from the private sector. So is there any number that shows how many of those 71 who are also in the private sector?
Well, yeah, thank you.
Maybe one final question.
One very quick question.
Thanks very much. It is very auspicious as an American doctoral student to see such interest in the United States from so many important Brazilians. I think it bodes very well for the future of the U.S. Briefly, another bomba, in the U.S. at least, is race. It's a subject that no one likes to talk about, but if you could look out that window and see Harlem there, you would see a profound segregation, a structural segregation where the blacks live here, the Latinos live here, and the whites live here. And we've learned a great deal from Brazil with Bolsa Familia being translated right here in New York in an effective policy. And you seem to be making progress, as you mentioned, in decreasing inequalities between racial groups. Now, clearly, our group gathered today is not representative of the racial groups of our two countries. But my question is, with regard to innovation, are there concerns about leaving really big populations behind? And what can the U.S. learn from Brazil? Because our mayor has finally figured out that we're leaving the black and brown people behind right here in New York. And yet, what do we do about it? Do you have any advice for the U.S.?
Very good.
Thank you very much. Tom's giving a dirty look. He means wrap it up. So it means, Mauricio, you've got about 2 minutes to answer all these questions.
Very quickly. So I will start with the final question about quota. So there is an ongoing process of affirmative action in education in Brazil. Several public institutions are already practicing some kind of quota policy. I know it's very controversial. A lot of people say a lot of arguments. We know everybody here knows the arguments. But I'd say that there is a tendency of the current government. I'm in favor of affirmative action for a while. And I would say that this is one of the guidelines of the National Education Plan to put a more affirmative action towards the racial inequality in the education system. Research, the problem about the lack of personnel, it was the second intervention. I think it's very important. Now, as I have already mentioned, we have a lack of personnel. So we have to involve more the private sector. It's not a responsibility only of the public sector. For example, We have made some agreements with Petrobras for the drilling, trained engineer who are needed in the new initiatives. The naval industry that our friend has mentioned. For example, I remember talking to people from an Italian shipyard. He was very concerned, again, about the naval engineers. So we have to develop. But anyway, it takes time. If you create a new course to have the professional, you have to wait at least 4 or 5 years. So that's why we do believe that we are in a rush. We have to speed up the process. We have to make a revolution because it's another picture of the economic scenario of the country. We can't go with that path. We have to speed up the process. And the intellectual property, of course, we have to provide a framework of legal incentives for innovation. And we do understand that's really the property intellectual rights are crucial for a policy of fostering innovation. And the cost of education, you give an idea, our friend gives an idea of taking 30% of a prospective loan to return to primary, to basic education. I'd say, Jorge has mentioned that we have put a lot of resources. The situation of public education is not a matter only of resources. It's a matter of management, of a new policy, of underlying assumptions. It's not a matter. I don't believe that if you introduce some payments in the federal university, you sort out the problem. I think the question is much more complicated, Tom. So we are now, in a certain sense, able to reserve the resources. So what we do need is to implement those policies which are in the guidelines of the national education plans. So I'd say that we have a lot of things to do, but we have done a lot. And I do believe that we are in the right direction with the proposals of enhancing, expanding opportunities territorially, with the proposal of improving quality by paying attention to the teachers, by introducing new ways of management in education. So we are in this process, and by connecting the public and the private sector. As Werner said, it's a shame what's happening with the profit graduate university institutions in Brazil. We have to conceive some designs, some ideas to force them to provide better teachers and also to provide research. All the research is done in the federal and state level public universities. So we have to put pressure on the private sector to make more innovation, more investment in research and development, and also in the profit educational institutions. So it's a matter for the companies, the enterprises, and also for the profit educational institutions in the country. We can't go on in this way, only the public institutions providing research and development. So it's a kind of general responsibility, because the public institutions, they are doing what they can. They are doing their best. They are improving a lot. We saw here a promising picture for the country as a whole and for the 2 states that we have already discussed: higher education, São Paulo, and the basic education in Pernambuco. So I think that we are in the right direction, but we have to speed up the process and put more pressure on everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. In terms of Brazil-U.S. cooperation, thank you very much, Mauricio Hans, for that wonderful addition from your perspective, an academic but also a politician, and I was happy to have that overview and add so much to our agenda.